Hello, thank you for tuning in to the Prophetic Flow. We're just so excited today. We're talking about women in politics, and I've got just a wonderful guest here who's done so much, and she's right here in Santa Barbara. Now, first of all, Michele, let's show your book, Change Your Stars. This is your book, Live Your Purpose and Achieve Your Dreams, right? Change your stars. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean astrologically, or how are we going to change your stars, Michele? Dígame.
Well, it's interesting, as my veteran husband really helped me with the name of the book, what it was going to be. We have a favorite movie, Knight's Tale, starring Heath Ledger.
Oh, yeah, that's a great movie.
It's this poor Thatcher's son who dreams of someday being a knight.
Yeah.
And one day there's a parade of knights going by, and he says, "Someday I'll be a knight." And then a member of the public starts laughing and says, "A poor Thatcher's son, a knight? You might as well change the stars." And he says, "Father, can it be done?" And his father looks at him and says, "Yes, William, a man can change his stars." And for me, this is my American dream story, that I had so many people over the years tell me, you need to write your story for those who can't come here, you speak in person.
Right.
And I finally sat down to do it. And so really with the objective of inspiring the next generation, because I believe we are all created for a purpose.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You're never going to be more fulfilled than when you're living your purpose. And encouraging them, we have now so many times there's the victim mentality, victim oppressor. And yes, I grew up, my mom.
You grew up a victim, right? Sort of? I mean,
well, as people would say today, my mom was a single parent, income below the U.S. defined poverty level, so we struggled to make ends meet, but that didn't hold me back. America and the land of opportunity. She was actually from here in Santa Barbara, is where she spent, ultimately they moved here when she was in high school. And so I spent my first 14 years here. We couldn't afford to live here and eventually had to move. But then, came back many, many years later now, back to Santa Barbara. But the opportunity to get a really good education, and I've had an amazing career I could have never planned, and had tremendous opportunities where I knew God has me here for a time such as this to make a positive difference. And it wasn't easy. A lot of times faced with things that many people considered impossible, we found a way to make it happen because it needed to happen.
Yes, well, you've had quite a situation. Let's look at your career, first of all. I mean, you moved up to Seattle, then you graduated from grad school, and you went right into the intelligence in D.C.
Yes, so my grad school was a feeder into the national security community, and I can talk about it now. As I was mentioning, I had to have my manuscript reviewed by the intelligence community and Department of Defense, before I had it published.
So you have to make sure it was kosher, right?
But I started out as an image scientist.
Image scientist?
Yes, initializing the payloads, the imaging payloads on reconnaissance satellites for the National Reconnaissance Office. So for anybody in Santa Barbara County, especially if you're in at Vandenberg Air Force Base, that might mean something to you.
Yeah, right. I have to get interpretations for that.
So that's where I started my career, and ultimately continued to expand and build on the things I had done. And then it was after 9/11 where I was recruited into national security government service, and was sworn in as a senior executive, a peer to general and flag officers in the military on my 33rd birthday.
Oh.
So that was a tremendous opportunity to affect positive change and do a lot of the things I had been trying to promote as someone in industry, but you just don't have the authority to do it. Mm-hmm. You need it to be a government official in order to take the charge and lead that change.
Because the government stuff is already so rigidly placed.
Oh, it is. And then industry partners, you're essentially just advising the government or contributing to their teams. You don't have decision-making authority. So it was 9 months to the day of 9/11 where I'm standing in front of the director of what is now the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the director of the National Security Agency, James Clapper and Mike Hayden, respectively. And as an inter-row industry partner, telling them, well, here's all the things we've done to combat terrorism around the globe, but here's all the policy barriers we're facing. And you two, as leading America's eyes and ears, need to tear down these walls and do better integration so that we can provide better intelligence to the decision makers and the warfighters.
How did they respond to that?
Well, amazingly, so many people, as I tell in my book, tried to stop that presentation, but at the end of it, they agreed to take the charge. And it was 4 weeks later, I got the call from James Clapper and said, Michele, I've been thinking a lot about this, and would you come into government and lead that charge to integrate what is now NGA and NSA and really change the way we do business? So I had that opportunity, and then when the Director of National Intelligence stood up, I was the first Deputy Chief Information Officer for the U.S. intelligence community for our first Director of National Intelligence, James Negroponte. And so that afforded me the opportunity. And it was actually Clapper and Hayden who told me that they had nominated me for that job. And they said, you're a technologist. You've been to the combat zones of Iraq and Afghanistan. You've run headlong into all of the policy barriers. Now you'll be in a position to do something about that. And so that was a tremendous opportunity. And it was also fun to be in on the ground floor of something new, which I've always, as an agent of change, I'm either helping to transform something existing or helping to establish something new. And in that case, the D&I was a new construct, and really saw myself as someone who would work to be an enabler of the mission. So modernizing technology and updating the policies to support those new technology enablers.
Now, Michele, you're a Christian. Have you been a Christian all your life?
Yes, I tell the story of my grandfather was a pastor, and actually was a pastor here in Santa Barbara.
Oh, which church?
Reverend Glenn Weslander. He was first pastor of Goleta Federated, and then years later was asked to, a church was closing, and they reached out to him and said, would you take it over? It was then Cathedral Oaks Assembly. And he became the senior pastor, turned it into a thriving church, and now it is South Coast Church, led by Rita Datillo.
God, that is so awesome.
So it was really, when I moved back here, they were doing a remodeling at the church, and so we were going someplace else, and then I saw the grand reopening and told my daughter, I said, my grandfather used to pastor that church. We need to go. And then during that service, they honored the former pastors, and my grandparents were in the video. And I reached out to Pastor Reno and I said, I'm Glenn Westlander's granddaughter. I would love to get a copy of that and share it with my family. And he talked to me for over 20 minutes and kind of gave me a backstory of everything that had happened between my grandfather pastoring and him taking over, and how my grandfather had been a mentor to him.
That's so amazing. That's a pillar in the community. It's really one of the best churches in Santa Barbara. So, I mean, you have an incredible history and background, and you came back to Santa Barbara in 2020?
2016.
Oh, 2016, I'm sorry. I guess 2020, I thought. That's when you ran for Congress.
Well, I was going to write this book in the beginning of 2016. My husband, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Quaid, was retiring from the U.S. Air Force in December 2015. And so I said, well, now you can be the primary breadwinner and I'll take, a step back. I resigned to my big job at Google at the time and started my own company, Synesis Nexus, so I could do consulting. And with so many people had asked me to consult and advise, and that gave me the freedom to do that, as well as being more present for our young daughter. She was 7 at the time. And day one of his retirement, I had to take him to the ER and found out he had a life-threatening brain tumor. And he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, and the VA rated him 100% disabled, 100% service-connected illness, unemployable, and homebound. And so he came home and said, I realize you can never have the career you once had, but I think you'd be an amazing coach because you're sought out as a mentor and a consultant. And so I got my coaching certification, and I thought he knew me so well because I really love working with people. My specialty is executive leadership, but I've coached people through all different aspects of life, and I find that very fulfilling. So that's what I do through Synesis Nexus. But after he passed away, I prayed about it, and I felt God was saying, stay in Santa Barbara. And as I was sharing with you, when we went back for his service at Arlington National Cemetery, we had hundreds of friends and colleagues show up And, you know, people talking to me for 2 hours and assuming, okay, you're going to come back to DC, right? You won't want for work because you've had an amazing career and an amazing network.
One of the 5% of the people there that are
And I said, well, no, I feel God saying to stay in Santa Barbara. And they said, well, how's that going to work? And I said, I don't know, but this has been a journey of faith. And someone, for me, and it probably comes out in this story, is just a very driven person and being self-sufficient, and I'm not expecting anybody else to take care of me. I know I need to work hard and take care of myself. But when my husband was diagnosed and he was we spent 2 years living out of hospitals, ICUs, you know, emergency rooms, and every day waking up and I could only see, you know, like one step ahead of me and just saying, God, there's only 24 hours in the day. Where do I focus my time? And I'm sleep deprived and my stress is at an all-time high. Yeah. And that was really a journey for me of saying, you know, I can't do it all and I can't be in 2 places at once, and never wanting to be a burden to anyone. I had to allow friends to say, what can I do for you? And let me come alongside you. And I'll tell you,
that's good. You got to receive.
Yes. And when we moved out here to Santa Barbara, I had no family. And the Christian community here really blessed us. I remember there were some room moms at my daughter's classroom who invited me to lunch and said, how, you know, what can we do for you? How can we support you? And I said,
that's so sweet.
I have contracts back in DC and I'm going to have to travel back next week and I don't know what I'm going to do with my daughter. And one of them said, hey, you know, she stays with me. And there was a family that said every time you have to travel, whether it's, you know, for work or if you're taking your husband to a medical appointment hours away, getting back late at night, we have your daughter. So it was really
you're
beautiful.
doing with your husband and going back to DC as well as
I still had contracts
Sophia?
I had to honor, you know, so when we moved out here, but we came out here to get him better care. And he had a specialist at UCLA, and he had a wonderful oncologist here, Dr. Dan Greenwald, who was just a gift.
He is a gift.
I called him my battle buddy because his dad was in the military.
No, he was instrumental in healing our pastor's wife in City Church in Ventura.
So we felt really blessed to have him by our side. In fact, he was the one I had to get the final word from him when I knew that there was no saving my husband. And so I don't know how he does the job he does because he's dealing with people, you know, battling cancer, but he is gifted and he's compassionate and he cares. And I learned, frankly, battling to get my husband, he had full benefits from the VA, you know, because of his rating and all. And it was a battle constantly to get them to give him to him. Really? And it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. It was many times, and, you know, I'm a uniquely qualified spouse because I spent my career fighting in bureaucracies. Yeah. So when I got the wrong answer, I just kept pushing until we got the right answer, even if it took, you know, writing a letter to the secretary of the VA, which sometimes is what it took to get the local VA to respond. Wow. But I'll just say is that, yeah, the care he got with Dr. Greenwald was wonderful. So we felt blessed in that.
Oh, that's great. So now you went on, though, that you're married to Michael English.
Yes. He is a widower. He lost his wife to leukemia 2 years before I lost my husband. And it was a mutual friend who introduced us and said, just simply, you two need to meet each other because you both fought alongside your spouses as they were battling cancer. Wow. And his children, his 2 sons, are older than my daughter, but they had been at the same school in the upper school. And we kept running into each other at, you know, events and finally, you know, he asked me out. We realized we had a lot in common. Yeah. Not only sharing the challenges of, you know, fighting alongside a spouse battling cancer, but our faith and so many interests. And now the partnership that we're doing, you know, in the community, really, he's taken the lead with Santa Barbara Voter Integrity Project. So
okay, so let's tell me a little bit about Santa Barbara Voter Integrity Project. What is that all about?
So it ties. You brought up the my run for Congress, right? And I shared with you how I had people for over 20 years telling me that, you know, we need people like you in public office. You should run for public office. Yes. And I don't want anything to do with politics. I said I'd only do it if I felt called, and I felt really strongly to do so. And so that was something I had to run past my family and there, you know, I could tell my husband looked a little stunned, and my daughter was like, yeah, Mom, you know, we've got this. And she knew all the other things I'd done in my career, but it was really the 3 of us so many times, you know, for my campaign. And we got exposed to so much. during that
That's
time.
a serious learning process.
Especially the corruption in our election systems in the United States of America. And I'll tell you, so many people ask me on the campaign trail when I mentioned, what are some of the things, and I said election integrity. Well, what does that mean to you? And I said, it's not about your candidate or my candidate winning. It's about the outcome of the elections representing the will of we, the people who voted.
Oh, yeah.
And today they do not.
No.
And
the algorithms
California
on those computers.
is number one in the nation for fraud. I believe they probably piloted
number one in the nation for fraud.
And do you know who the number 2 and number 3 are? It will surprise you.
Huh.
Texas and Florida.
Wow.
And so you say, well, wait a moment.
That's
California is a
amazing.
blue state, supposedly, and Texas and Florida are red. Well, if you look at the Electoral College numbers, those are the states to turn, because then you have so many Electoral College votes from those states.
Right.
So we see things.
How many Electoral Colleges? So it would be a lot of Electoral College in California, Texas, and Florida.
It's all population driven. So you see things like in California, under the guise of COVID, Gavin Newsom signed into law 100% mail-in voting. Well, if you think about it, not everybody intends to vote. Some people are dead, some people have moved away. And you go and send compulsory mail ballots even to residences where, vacant lots or, places where there is nobody.
7-Eleven stores.
You've just created
hotels.
A massive credit line for fraud. So you think about it, maybe in a primary election, 1/3 of the voters show up, or maybe in a presidential, 2/3 of the voters. Well, you have all those rest of those registrations that are a credit line for fraud. And so when we have a month of early voting, they can essentially preload their desired outcome. The only way.
How do you mean preload? Maybe simplify that.
Well, with
for
what
us.
you see people, they talk about, I'm an independent, but we look at the parties. The Democrats have a machine where they actually pay activists. They pay people to go after votes and buy votes and harvest ballots. And if the Republicans think they're going to compete with them, that's laughable, really. There's no way. So you have those ballots. And then you have, there's also cases where in nursing homes, people weren't voting.
Right.
Staff in nursing homes were voting, or people were coming and collecting those ballots. And if you look at it, like in the trends in Santa Barbara, a lot of times you see on election night when they've counted all the early mail-in ballots, you see kind of a 65-35 or a 70-30. It's always the same.
Yeah.
Well, the best way to overcome the fraud is show up in person on election day, because they don't know how you're going to vote. And so, but then they now have 2 weeks.
The best way to do it is to show up in person on the election
which is
day.
how we used to do it, right?
Yeah, go to the precincts, right?
So yes,
and not a lot of people went to precincts this time.
No, they really play up how it's so inconvenient to vote, but you think about. Our vote is sacred because it determines the direction of our country.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah.
And when we now have states trying to get, these illegal migrants, they're trying to give them IDs and register them to vote, and they say, only for the federal, or only for the local. Well, that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And then even if those people don't vote, you've created more of a credit line for fraud, because those are all registered voters. And if you heard stories where people showed up to vote in person, were told they'd already voted.
Oh, yeah.
So you know how that happens. Is we are all profiled. So let's just say I rarely ever vote. So I would have a very low voter propensity kind of score. Let's say you've never missed an election. So whose registration would they choose to cheat with, yours or mine?
Yours.
Mine.
Yeah.
And so let's say I never voted hardly ever, but man, I am gung-ho on this election, and all of a sudden I show up and I get told, you've already voted. Well, what happened is they used my registration to cast a vote because they assumed I wasn't going to show up.
So how do you combat that?
So what we tell people now is, especially with 100% mail-in voting, is do not vote by mail, hold on to that ballot, show up in person at the precinct, and if they say you've already voted, you go, oh no, I'm not, and here is my ballot.
Yeah.
And they're required to give you an in-person, so you could drop that off, but they won't count it for 2 weeks. You need to get that same day ballot, vote in person, with the same day ballot, put it in the little bin. Those are the votes that get counted on election night. All those others, when they're just dropping them off, like the mail-in ballots, they'll get around to it sometime. Usually about 2 weeks.
We need to have you come back on and be real clear on this in October before we start this voting process.
So we have, my husband and I, after the election, we had gone to hear people like Dr. Douglas Frank, he's a data scientist. He's had so many peer-reviewed papers out there, and he was showing he's just watched elections out of interest for decades, and he started noticing weird trends in 1996 where it looked like voter rolls were being inflated, and then he started watching recent trends in elections. He'll do the analysis, and as he likes to say, that ain't natural. He came back and showed us data specifically on Santa Barbara County. And there's something called an R value. And if your analysis can be perfectly predicted of how many votes, from each, age group and all, if it can be perfectly predicted because it's driven by an algorithm, it's R value of 1. Santa Barbara's 0.99. So that means we're almost R value 1, is we are driven by algorithm here in Santa Barbara County. The whole state is. So you see the early voting, the machines, the poll books, the voting systems, all of that is there. There's so many ways you can. Anybody who knows cybersecurity. I spent 25 years in national security. We would never trust these systems.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
And so you want to take my sacred vote, which determines the direction of our nation.
Yes.
And say we're going to use these systems. It's laughable. They've essentially found a way to hijack your vote and my vote and everybody's vote to manipulate them to their desired outcome,
Michele,
right?
what do we do about that?
What we're pushing for with Santa Barbara Voter Integrity Project, which Michael English, my husband, has started, is we're going regularly before the Board of Supervisors at their meetings to express our concern. And for example, one meeting I was at, we took the testimony of Colonel Sean Smith, and he had overseen all of the DoD satellite assets except for a few. And so his career experience, when he was seeing these anomalies with the election systems, he got curious and started doing a deep dive investigation. And he was alarmed. And so he speaks in detail to how these systems can be compromised and how you would never trust these for critical systems like in Department of Defense, for example.
Yeah.
And so we read his testimony. A group of us just continuously read his testimony before the Board of Supervisors. And we've brought more and more testimony before them to show the vulnerabilities of the machines. Now, they signed a contract with Dominion Voting System. They can cancel it. It's coming due. It's ending. They don't need to renew it, and they could terminate it.
When is it coming due?
And we would say, I believe, you don't quote me on this, I think it was this year when it would be up. So they don't have to renew it. But we would save money, and they are in a budget deficit, right?
Yeah,
we would save money if we went back to
right?
pound
millions
counting.
of dollars, I read.
And we would also have integrity restored to our elections. If we could show ID, prove who you are, right? Vote on paper and hand count it, and it could be done. We've seen demos, and in precincts, usually if you have 1,200 or less, those votes can be counted that night. So people work different shifts as volunteers, and you have people come in, and it's people from, both parties or a mix, because we have multiple parties represented here in Santa Barbara. We have Democrat, Republican, American Independent, Libertarian, Green, so there's all these different parties, and they're all welcome to be there and participate in the hand counting.
Now, Michele, how long have we had mail-in ballots? Just since 2020?
Well, we've always had an ability, if you were going to be, say, gone on trial or in the military, you could get an absentee ballot.
Right.
So to put a fine point on this, with absentee ballots, you specifically, like I would be, and this happened to me when I was working in the national security community. I was going to be overseas on official government business. I sent in a request to say, and I had to justify, I'm going to be on travel for official business. I will not be here on election day.
Absolutely.
I need an absentee ballot.
Yeah.
Well, that ensures that I, the voter whose registration is represented there, had actually intended to vote and asked for a ballot.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Just compulsory, just sending ballots willy-nilly all across the state to people who don't intend to vote or maybe are dead or moved away or whatever. And then there was a lady at my church who says, yeah, I got a couple different ballots to me, addressed to me. So she has like two identities. So you could still do that absentee for people who have extenuating circumstances where they can't be there on election day. But otherwise, this is so important. And I believe election day should be a holiday.
Yeah.
You know, so that people have, you know, nothing holding them back from being there, and that they vote in person with ID to prove who they are. Because, I mean, now I could show up and claim I was you.
Yeah.
As long as I know your address or whatever, you know, and I can fudge your signature, we're good. And I could vote. So showing ID is one step. I mean, we show ID for all sorts. We show ID to board airplanes, right? You know, why not to
they
vote?
would never let us. I mean, they would let all the people coming from all over the border, they can board airplanes without ID. But
isn't that
us.
insane?
Yeah.
So yes, all the people who wanted to force us to have vaccine passports and show ID for everything are letting illegal migrants come over the border with no ID, putting them on planes with no ID.
Vaccination.
So you really have to question what's
going on here.
What's going on here?
What is going on here?
That's for sure.
So election day should be a holiday, but what do you think? What's the most effective? Obviously, you say number one is to vote in person on election day, which we will do in November. But what do you think now we should be doing? I mean, there's 140 different spots open for election that you can register for before July 1st, and you know, if people can get on that who are conservative, it's going to make a big difference.
I think what's really important is we have, I mean, if you look back to our founders, were their intentions? One, they restricted the federal government via the U.S. Constitution.
Absolutely.
Number two, they never wanted career politicians. They would expect you or me or anybody else to all of a sudden feel called to go serve their fellow citizens.
That's how you felt.
Go serve for a while.
Yeah.
And then go back to your day job.
Yeah.
You know, and now we have people who start from, you know, barely out of school, and they get groomed by somebody and they just work their way up. And so they spend their whole life in politics.
Yeah.
They're so out of touch with the average person.
Yeah.
And so they also get to get favors, you know, they get compromised, they get blackmailed, they get bought out, where they essentially become, as we've seen a lot in California, just a rubber stamp. For whatever their party tells them to do, they just mindlessly follow. So one thing when I was a candidate, a lot of people I found being an independent, people were open to talk with me. And even if we didn't see eye to eye on everything, just through the conversation, they would say, you know, I like you. I feel like you're a person of integrity. You've got good leadership skills. I believe you'll make the decision you think is best for the people you represent.
Absolutely.
All of us.
Yeah.
And so though we aren't registered with the same party, or in my case, I'm not registered, you know, with a party at all, is that they would say, okay, I will vote for you. And I believe the sad thing is people like me are a huge threat to the uniparty. And let me define what the uniparty is.
Yeah, please.
Is you have establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats, those career politicians, who have a power sharing agreement. And so they don't care.
They have an actual agreement?
Like, you know, hey, you're in the lead this time around, I'll be in the lead next time around, or A team or B team, but we all stay in power, right? I saw this in D.C. in spades. I spent my career, you know, working in and around the D.C.
20 years in Washington, D.C.
Oh, it's 25.
25.
And so you saw people who just think, yeah, it's blue to red, red to blue, it doesn't matter. And what people don't understand now is it's different. Is we have people in positions of power who do not support the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
They do not support individual liberty.
Right.
They're the ones who are saying, oh, the document's outdated. We need to update it for modern times. Why? Because the U.S. Constitution stands between them and their agenda.
Right.
We have people in office who have collectivist mindset.
Right.
Who don't
what is that? What is collectivist mindset?
So in our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to preserve these rights, governments are instituted among men and derive their just power from the consent of the governed. And so when I was on the campaign trail, I would explain to people, what does that mean? It means our founders used Judeo-Christian principles and acknowledged that liberty comes from God, not man, that the higher authority is God, not the state, and that a just government doesn't rule your life. A just government protects those liberties. A just government acts in your best interest. So I'd ask on the campaign trail when it says, you know, and they would derive, you know, a just government protects those rights and derives their power from the consent of the governed. And I would say, do you believe the government is operating with your consent? And I would get a resounding no from everybody in the audience. And this was people, it could be Republicans, independents, you know, JFK Democrats. People are like, no, I feel like that I'm talking to to my government officials, and I might as well be talking to a brick wall because they don't feel like they're accountable to me.
Or even that goes for the school board or city council or the board of supervisors.
Yes, because I spoke before school boards, and you could tell, we would show up en masse and have our prepared talking points, and they cut our time in half, and it was like they were sitting there bored waiting for us to finish, and then they would just go ahead and vote as they intended to vote.
Right.
But you know why they can act with impunity? Because the system that installed them works in their favor. Our rigged system works in their favor.
Right.
I firmly believe that if we went back to voting in person on election day with voter ID, on paper ballots, hand counted at the precincts, you would see a lot of people losing their jobs. And I think you would see a change in who is in office.
So are you really going for this? I mean, are you really making this going after this?
Oh, yes.
I mean, not just in Santa Barbara County, but you could do the whole state
nationwide. And so one thing that I mentioned Dr. Frank earlier, he saw me after I'd run, and it was funny, he saw me in the audience of one of his presentations, and he goes, "Thank you for running. You were not selected." And he says, because you don't have elections in California, you have C-elections. And then he said, I invite you to, Mike Lindell has been using his personal wealth to fund lawsuits where there's just mounds of data that expose the fraud that has been going on in our nation and in all states, all 50 states. And sadly, courts are afraid to take these cases, and judges throwing it out for lack of standing, supposedly, which is not legitimate. Or they're seeing the evidence, alarmed, and immediately sealing the evidence so that the public can't know about it, which is wrong. The public needs to know, because if this evidence came out, everybody would be alarmed. So it goes back to what I told people on the campaign trail, is election integrity is not about your candidate or my candidate winning. It's about the outcomes of the election and representing the will of we, the people who cast our votes. We, the citizens of the state and the nation who cast our votes. And so I'm okay. I mean, we don't always win, right? But as long as you feel like you had a legitimate election, to say, okay, well, maybe, somebody else won, and we'll, better luck next time. Right now, you have people investing time, talent, and treasure, and it's for naught if you have a rigged system. And so then you get, government officials who claim to be representing you, who don't represent you at all. They represent the people who installed them and do their bidding. So that's a very critical issue. And my national security background kind of has made me very in tune, also very interested in this. Plus the fact that, I've served my country in various capacities.
But you've been in the NSA, which is
well, I didn't work in NSA, but I've walked the hallowed halls of NSA. But I've been to combat zones. I mean, my husband ultimately gave his life for our country. He served in combat zones. It was his service that led to his brain cancer. And, and so this is very personal to my daughter and I, and she understands that mommy and daddy served, the country. I was a civilian, he was in uniform, but so many people sacrifice so much for our liberty, and the least we, the people who have had those blessings of liberty, can do now is to stand united against the tyranny we're seeing, and fight for our rights, which are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, while we still have the U.S. Constitution.
Yes, I don't think people realize how deep we are in it.
Yes, and so one thing I wrote recently in an article is, will America reach its 250th birthday, or will we succumb to the collectivist mindset?
Well, the collectivist mindset is
so
communism,
we go here,
anti-God.
So if people
there
understand,
is no God except
Karl Marx hated God and the concept of God, and God would not realize it. So he came up with this whole philosophy of Marxism. And so that's where there is no God. The highest power is the state. And so there's three things that have come out of Marxism we see implemented. We see communism, so that's like Vladimir Lenin.
Right.
And then you see
millions of people killed.
Yes,
millions.
Over 100 million people have lost their lives due to communists. And then fascism, that was Benito Mussolini. And so he didn't focus on, whereas, communism was the government owns everything, takes control. Fascism is where you have public-private partnerships. Now, have we heard that a lot in the news lately? And with the World Economic Forum and the government, we have public-private partnerships. So let me just do a sidebar on that. So when the government officially can't do something because it's unconstitutional, like vaccine mandates, for example. You saw the administration, well, they couldn't mandate it because it's unconstitutional. But they could tell employers that you need to mandate that. That's a public-private partnership. That's one example of
where
the government's not allowed to do it, so they get industry, business to do it.
I was wondering how they could do that.
But the third offshoot of Marxism is Nazism. So a lot of people believe the big lie that somehow fascism and Nazism are ideologies of the right, which is nonsense. They're all rooted in Marxism. That's collectivist ideology. So in the case of Nazism, you had, the focus on the Jews. It's like there has to be some scapegoat, but you're seeing this happen in our society now, that we're trying to divide by color, we're trying to divide by race, we're trying to divide by social status, because we don't really have a caste system. And so you have the victims and oppressors. And one of the tactics of the left, and Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals is essentially the left's Bible.
Which Hillary Clinton did her thesis on.
And Barack Obama, what was on his resume? He was a community organizer.
Right.
And what do community organizers do? They come into a community, find a point of friction, and rub it raw. So what do we have in America? We have some racial friction. So they'll come into an area and rub that raw. And so you have groups like Black Lives Matter. Sounds really nice, doesn't it? Because of course Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
They're Marxists. They said, we're trained Marxists.
Trained Marxists.
And they wanted to destroy the nuclear family, essentially burn down America and reestablish in the Marxist image. But they pulled that from their website when people started realizing what they were.
Yeah.
Then Antifa, anti-fascist, they're actually rooted back in German fascism.
Right.
So out of the socialist movement there. So a lot of Americans are ignorant to those forces. So that was another thing I brought up on the campaign trail. Probably a unique candidate in many ways, including 25 years of national security. So saying, let's remind everybody of the founding principles of America, and now let's look at all the agendas that are at play to try to destroy us.
Yes, well, a lot of people are not aware of that.
No, like the communist goals for America that were captured in the book.
Wait. Let's hold back on that. So let's tell me exactly, what are the communists? That was done in 1961?
Actually, the book was written in 1958 and it was read in a congressional record in 1963 as a warning that these goals existed. And so like goal number 15, infiltrate one or more of the primary political parties. Well, they've done that. There was another goal, infiltrate the schools, put the party line in the textbooks. The other one is destroy the nuclear family, separate children from their parents, and essentially attribute parents as being, repressive, as holding the children back. They want to infiltrate the media. And so when you read, and I would selectively, depending on the audience, pick certain parts of those communist goals for America, some of them really tied to the times. But if you start reading from goal 15 on to the end, they are all relevant to today's times. And I saw people in the audience like jaws drop, eyes wide open. And I said, where we are today is not by accident. It was planned. And if you've ever heard of Yuri Bezmenov, he's a former KGB agent. And he defected, came to America. There's a video from him in 1984, how apropos, of him warning America. He loved America. And he said, you don't realize the KGB, part of our primary role was ideological subversion, and there's 4 stages to that. And so you demoralize a people. We've been demoralized in so many ways. You destabilize a people. Then you have a crisis, and then you usher in a new normal. Those are the 4 stages. And in 1984, he said they had been conducting ideological subversion already in America. You fast forward to 2024, 40 years later, how many generations have been subjected to ideological subversion? So I actually wrote an article called "We Are in a War for America's Soul" that the Epoch Times chose to publish, where I go into detail on the ideological subversion and also talk about the Hegelian dialectic, where people want a desired outcome, like Patriot Act, for example, where it restricted our liberties. That was sitting on a shelf and Congress couldn't get it passed, but they used 9/11 as essentially the ramrod for pushing it through. The 2 senators who tried to put the brakes on that both had anthrax delivered to their offices.
Wow.
So a lot of people don't realize that as well. But so you create a crisis, and then you have people scream, somebody do something. They're like, oh, here's our proposal. Before you know it, this iteration over time, like with the Patriot Act, my daughter doesn't know flying on airplanes without going through TSA. That's all they've ever known, right? But we remember when you'd be last minute running to the, into the gate, right, trying to get there. So these are different ways where people who do not believe in America's founding principles, who do not believe in individual liberty, have slowly plotted to change the worldview of America. Like you even see the indoctrination in the public schools. They push out God, they push out prayer, they push out the golden rule, they push out those principles. And then they say, oh, freedom of religion, but their religion is there's all this other stuff like the transgenderism and the Marxism and all that other stuff. So they're just as religious. It's just that their religion is godless, right?
Yeah. Oof. So now what, Michele? You're doing your Synesis Nexus.
Yes. So through my business Synesis Nexus, I'm doing consulting and coaching, and occasionally we'll do speaking engagements, and then of course publish my book.
Oh, your book!
And this was such a big undertaking, but it was a labor of love.
I know, it's not
and I hope that
it's interesting
so
because
many
it's got
people,
so many personal stories in it. It's not just facts and figures. You know, you're telling the story of your life and all the. What you had to go through, the brain cancer and all that kind of thing.
Well, actually, I don't get to that. And here, the original story was going to end in the end of 2015 with my husband's retirement, and I was going to start writing in 2016. So even though I picked it up many years later, that's where it ends. So it ends on a high note.
Oh.
Writing everything that came after that would be a whole nother book. And I mentioned it in the acknowledgments, but yes, throughout the book, too, you'll notice I have pull quotes in there where they're just little points that I really wanted to drive home for the reader of insights I had from my life and career experiences.
But you did change your stars. I mean, that's something to go back to. People need to realize that they can change their whole life. That's what we do with Arise. I think we'll put on a little, our video clip of some of the girls that we have in Hawaii, right? Some of the testimonies of the stories of the women that, we take out of shelters and we put them in 2 nights and 3 days in the hotels, and then we have pastors following up on them, and it totally changes their mentality.
Your name, and you're going to tell me what Arise has done for you.
All right.
Okay, ready.
My name is Krista Lathan.
Hi, my name is Shay Shay.
Hi, my name is Gayleen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christine.
Hi, I'm Carol. I received the Holy Spirit, and it has changed me to be sober. I no longer drink, smoke weed, do cocaine, smoke cigarettes. I am free and free indeed.
I fought with addiction, divorce, domestic violence, all of that stuff. And I just feel like knowing that I have women surrounding me and being there for me and helping me through it just gives me more hope.
The Arise conference has given me the gift to see the beauty in things in a different way, to trust in people, more so women.
This conference is enormous. The speakers are awesome. They leave an impact in your life. They've left an impact in mine. Just being in these conferences has given me something to look forward to in life.
Coming from a background of addicts and alcoholics, such as I did, right? And not really having that firm foundation in who Jesus Christ is, not just as the lover of my soul, but as the Father.
Arise has really been a big part of my life in setting me free.
Learning from this Arise conference how to be faithful, how to be compassionate, and how to have love, most of all love. When we have love in our hearts, then we are able to conquer anything and do everything that we possibly can. I get to go home and just walk a different story now.
I'm just grateful. There's nothing that I can give back to this program except for breathing life into others like it has me.
I just really love you guys and love what you guys do. Thank God for Mary and all of you guys, because honestly, you guys are amazing.
So here's to the rest of you Diamond Girls that are gonna jump on board. May you have the same experience that I had and I have, and may you live continuously to serve the Lord. In Jesus' name.
I love those girls from Hawaii. They are just such, once they get a hold of God, boy, they're like pit bulls. They don't let go. And Michele, tell us on the epilogue of your book, you tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things is, I love those testimonies. They're so precious. And one of the things I put in my epilogue is, life is precious. You are God's masterpiece created for a purpose, and you are here for a time such as this. No one is here by accident, even if your parents say you're a mistake. No matter your circumstances, God loves you unconditionally the way you are. And nothing you've done in the past or could do in the future will change that. Nothing can separate you from God's love. And when I look at that, I think those testimonies, it's so beautiful to see, is they're realizing that. And then I went on to say, don't compare yourself to anyone else. What is your value? You are priceless. God has a plan and purpose for you. Why are you here? God has given you unique gifts and talents and put you here at this time and place to uniquely impact the world. And
yes,
we know that in
right.
all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28 NIV. So this is just a portion of my epilogue, but I really thought of that when I heard those testimonies of those women.
Yeah, they were awesome. I mean, the thing is, you're not, you've had an amazing career, and God's going to use you in an astounding way, even in the future. But you think about Billy Graham, somebody like that, who was just sitting under a tree, and a little old lady came and shared her testimony and got him born again. I mean, she was used mightily too. So don't ever say, well, I can't do anything. Do you have a next door neighbor? Do you have somebody that's in need? Yes, you can do something. You're a speaking spirit. You've got a voice. And that's why conferences this year are going to emphasize the voice, because you've got a voice. You need to be bold. You need to stand up. You can't stand back in a day like this when you've got everything, like Michele was talking about the collectivist mentality. Well, what is collectivist mentality? It means they don't consider you as a person. They just consider you as a group. So if that's the way you want to live, and you want to have a social credit score like they have in China, then more power to you. But that's not going to work for you if you have a desire to be an individual of merit and things God has called you to. He's got a divine calling on your life, and you don't want to let go of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Everybody does. And what I love the story you told, I listened to the podcast, it's Faith, Family, and Freedom by Curtis Bowers. And he'd been in state legislature, and he was at a university, and someone said, would you go sit in on the Communist Party meeting here on campus? And he thought it was going to be a bunch of radicals. So he's like, well, yeah, I'll go see what this is. He says it was people in business suits and briefcases. And they were very methodical in planning what they were going to do to change America. And they were starting in the institutions to change mindsets. So they started in college, and now we see it all the way K through 12. And so he decided to take his life savings. And by the way, he's a homeschool dad of 9. So he took his life savings, took 2 years off, and created the documentary Agenda. He was showing it around the nation. In one audience, a man stood up and said, I'm a professor at this college, and I congratulate you on the thorough work you have done, but it's too late. We already own the minds of your children. And he walked out.
Wow.
And so Curtis went on to do Agenda 2. I highly recommend those movies, but fast forward to
Agenda 1 and Agenda 2.
Agenda 2. But
on YouTube?
You can buy the movies, I know, on DVD, on Amazon, or other places. And he has a website, Agenda Weekly. But he had a recent interview on his podcast, which you can get on like Apple Podcasts, for example, of his Faith, Family, Freedom podcast. Alex Newman wrote a book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. And he talks about how it was Dewey and Mann who said, they tried to pull God out of American society decades ago, and Americans would have none of it. And they said the only way we can change America is to start with the children. And Lenin talked about, you give me one generation of children and I'll change the world. And so that's what they have been doing. And people don't realize, they think, oh, my taxpayer dollars pay for public education, so I'm going to get my money's worth. Well, and let me tell you, I have family members who are teachers in public education, and they are believers, and they are awesome. So I'll just put that out there now. But the teachers' unions are controlled by Marxists, and they're pushing agendas that fulfill that kind of mindset.
That's how we have to come in there with Jesus. We have to come in there with revival. We have to speak to people and talk to people. We can't stand back, because it's the only thing that's going to help this situation being so deeply indoctrinated like a tick.
Absolutely. And so with collectivist mindset too, is when you start to say, when you don't value life just based on humanity, it can become a slippery slope. So we kill the not yet born, and now we euthanize the elderly or the people who can't pay their bills in Canada, or the sick. So you
people
say
can't pay their bills in
they get
Canada?
offered in Canada, if you're homeless and can't support yourself, they offer to do assisted suicide. They call it something else.
Oh my gosh.
But that's where we've devolved to. So if you do not believe in the higher power and that you are created in the image of God and that everyone has worth based on that,
that's the only
you can
reason
do
we have
evil
worth.
things like that. You can do what communism did of destroying, and Nazism did, and fascism did. And you can do what we're doing in quote unquote civilized societies, where we're murdering the not yet born and we're euthanizing those who we feel like are not contributing to society.
Right.
So it comes down to everyone is precious. Every life is precious. And God, and no one's here by accident. And this is a theme throughout my book, because so many people thought the circumstances into which I was born would dictate where I would go in life. And I tell people, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
And that's so true for people out there that, you think, well, I was born on the west side, on the east side, and I'll never get out of here. No, your circumstances do not control you. Your thoughts and your actions control you.
Absolutely. And I talk about it specifically, I think even in the preface of saying you can't control what happens to you. Right. But you can control your response and your attitude towards it.
Absolutely.
And so many times it's like choices are the hinges of destiny. And that's a quote
so
by
good.
Pythagoras. And it's true,
Choices
because
are
the
the
little
hinges of
choices
destiny.
we made in life will direct our path. But even if we misstep, God finds a way to use those painful experiences to still
Turns it around
shape
for good.
us and mold us. And for me, every bad experience I've been through in life is like, okay, God, what do I need to learn from this? How have I grown? And then try to let it go, so I'm not living with that anymore, and put it behind you, and you move forward.
What did Paul say? Press forward to the mark of the high calling of God in your life and leave those things behind. You don't have to just keep wallowing in the mud, wallowing in the stuff and the terrible things. There are terrible things that happen. There's no doubt about it. But how you respond to it, like Michele says, makes all the difference.
And we all have a race to run, and hopefully we run it well.
Yes.
And we hear, well done, good and faithful servant, in the end.
Exactly. And I hope you run some more races. So do you have any idea what you might do in the future?
Well, I'm very open to serving in government again, whether that's serving in an administration or running for public office. I believe we need people like me who don't want a career in politics, who love this country,
You're a voice.
love liberty, who have the courage of their convictions and integrity, people who will tell the truth and do what's right regardless of the personal cost. We need some very courageous people, because we have to make some tough decisions to get our country back on track. But I am someone who's a realist, but also an optimist, because I believe we, the people, have the ability. We are the sovereign of this nation. We can take back that title of sovereign and make sure that the government is working for us and hold them accountable. And what it's going to take, and I'll go back to the elections, none of us can vote the party slate. Everyone, because you can be manipulated. They'll run phony candidates to take legitimate candidates out in primaries. You need to do your homework, get to know the candidate, talk to them, question them, vote for the person who shares your values. Vote for the person you think will represent your best interest. Don't just vote as your party's told you to vote, because that's how they're all being manipulated, and people are getting installed. In addition to the election integrity issues, people are getting installed that just do the party's bidding. And they are not looking out for our best interests. So we go back to people like George Washington, who didn't want to be president, but chose it, and then was asked to do a third term and stepped down, setting the precedent to say, no, I have served, it's time for someone else to serve.
And you can see pictures of him praying on his knees.
Yes, we need God-fearing American patriots in office, and the only way that's going to happen is if we, the people, do our homework, and we are very careful how we vote, and that we also push for returning to how we did elections years ago, with ID in person on election day, paper ballots hand counted at the precincts. And I believe that that will enable us to turn this around, and we will preserve liberty for future generations. Was that famous Reagan quote is, freedom is only one generation away from extinction.
Right, it is, yeah.
And so we need to teach that to our children. and help them understand that we don't take it for granted, because so many people sacrifice so much to give us the freedom we have today and to defend our liberty at home and abroad.
I mean, with things that are taught at school, how do you deal with that at schools?
Well, it's interesting. I homeschooled my daughter for 2.5 years, so pulled her out beginning of 2021, and was asked to direct the 9th grade. And I loved the curriculum because we taught American government as well as economics. There's this great book, Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, that I was saying needed to be required reading for everybody in Congress because they don't seem to understand economics. Yeah. But we read the founding documents. We read George Washington's inaugural address and farewell address, and Kennedy, JFK's, and Reagan's, and we read the Federalist Papers. And
but
so
they don't,
we had
discussions. Doing that at Santa Barbara High.
Yes, they don't do that in the regular schools.
Right.
But I believe the omission of true American history is intentional, because if you don't know your history, you don't know your identity, and then you can believe anything about your nation. Mm-hmm. I mean, the lie of like the 1619 Project that, this nation was founded on slavery, that's nonsense. And many historians flagged the gross inaccuracies of that, and yet people funded it to be curriculum in schools. So it's really important.
Well, the 1619 Project, just tell us a little bit. We have just about a minute's worth that you could tell us a little bit about what it is. And it is in a lot of schools.
It's pretty much a fabrication saying that, America was founded on slavery and white supremacy, which is nonsense. One thing to drive home to people is our founders came from all walks of life and all ages, poor people, wealthy people, everything in between, but they had a conviction. It was the Black Robe Regiment, the preachers, who led the cause of liberty. They preached on Sundays, took off their robes, and led the cause of liberty, and our founders were divinely inspired to write those principles down.
They went down to fight with the other soldiers, right?
And I like to remind people, do you know the signers of the Declaration of Independence? That when they signed that, they knew they were putting a death warrant on their heads, and they were willing to do that because that love of liberty and their belief that that's what God was calling them to do. And our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor, they pledged to each other. And you look at John Hancock wrote his The Biggest.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, bring it on. My husband loved the Spartan cry of Molon Labe, come and take it. The Spartans. Oh
yeah.
And so really that's where we are in America is, we have to have that same conviction that our founders did. And yes, it's going to cost something, but that cost is worth it to preserve liberty for future generations.
Do you feel like with the Texas issue at the border that we could go into civil war?
Well, I can tell they're trying to stoke it, but we the people have to keep our heads about us and see that's that rub it raw, divide and conquer. And we have to be unified, level-headed, and take ways we have legally to enforce our laws. And what's really disturbing, especially from a national security background, is you have people coming over that border. It's not families, it's military-age men from countries that hate us.
Like China.
We have sleeper cells all over this country who are just waiting to be activated to wreak havoc. And I know that there are many people who do not want to see the U.S. have an election in November. And so we need to be prayerful about that. God is still in control, but we the people need to be faithful to pray. People need to be faithful to engage.
Okay. Well, Michele, pray us out.
Oh, Lord, thank you so much for the privilege of living in the United States of America. And thank you for our founders who loved you and understood that liberty comes from God, not from man, and that a just government protects our inalienable rights. Lord, we pray your mercy on our nation. We pray 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and seek my face and repent and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and heal their land. And God, we pray for a healing here in the America, in the who love liberty, who founding principles and